Well, we'll kick off with a question. I've got a question for everyone, and then we can take some questions from the audience, and hopefully those watching online will post some questions in the chat, and we will try and address those as we go along. Okay, so I'll start. I'll just work my way from here, from Wesley. So what is something you think many people don't know about the history of this area, or even central Geelong, a little bit further, or a bit broader in context? Something unique about its heritage and culture.
I'm not sure if this microphone is it working? Or, it's all good. Okay. I suppose, I think I mentioned in the presentation, it's fascinating as an architect to come into sites that you don't know and learn about its history. And growing up in Sydney and travelling around and being in Melbourne, it was kind of my first experience really working in Geelong and getting to know it. And we're doing another building down the road, which was my first kind of invite to Geelong. I found one of the interesting things when we started learning about the civic accommodation precinct was that Johnston Park used to be a swamp, and then it was made into a dam, and then transformed into a public park in, I think, 1872 by Robert de Bruce Johnston. And it's a great example of spatial transformation and how it impacts a city and can create a great public amenity. So that'd probably be the one that sticks in mind for me.
Thanks, Wesley. Phoebe.
Thank you. I would agree, Johnston Park has got a fascinating history. One of my favourite things that a lot of people might not know was that Cardinia Park used to be a zoo. So for about 30 years in the early 20th century, Johnston Park held an array of animals. There was monkeys, native Australian animals. There was elephants that people could ride. I have it on good authority that the elephant manure was then sold on to people to use on their gardens. And there were offers of lions and all sorts of things circuses used to perform in that particular area. So that to me is just a really nice little story. But also, I think looking at the industrial side of Geelong, places like the Federal Woolen Mills and the wool stores had such a pivotal role in Geelong and Geelong's history, the industry in Geelong, that brought a lot of people here and have grown the communities that we see today. So we had a really huge influx of migrants after the Second World War, and they helped to grow the communities that we have in Geelong today.
Thanks, Phoebe. I'm learning as well. David.
Hello? Okay. Yes, and I'd like to expand upon that. I'm a relative newcomer to Geelong. I've only been here 15 months. And I think what surprises me is the fact that this was very much an industrial centre. I think like Phoebe touched upon the wool stores. I think the wool stores are this outstanding national value collection that we have here. And the fact that we had this incredible working port, that the waterfront here, which is now almost a recreation reserve, was once this incredible hive of working people, of pubs and hotels and accommodation houses for sailors and people working. That's all changed, and we have some relics and some mementos of that we need to care for and integrate. But the other aspect is, it's one of the layers of history that we have here, and heritage is about layers, and we look at the Wadawurrung's layers, and I'm learning about them, the lagoons, the Wurdi-Yuangs, the link to the bay. We have industrial layers. We're now going through a new phase, and I suppose it's important that we capture the stories and the mementos from the past, but we also allow new layers to evolve and become part of our community and society.
Thanks, David. Peter.
Yes, can I just say too, Wesley, that presentation, look, I have seen it because I've been on council several times, but each time I see it, I'm more excited about that project, and we'll still be on council, hopefully, when it's built. So I really look forward to working from there. And I guess then the exciting part about it, it opens up the opportunity for the restoration of the town hall and the expansion of the art gallery. So that's exciting in itself. But getting back to the question, I think every day, if you put yourself out there, especially the heritage portfolio, I'm learning something new every day. But I think the Wadawurrung language, it plays such an important role in the Geelong's history, and some of our street names, Murrabul, Corio and Jeringhap, for example, originate from the Wadawurrung language. So, Jonathan, at the end of the line, I'm not going to pass it any further.
Thank you, Peter. Well, we might open it up to the floor if anyone in the audience has got a question. We've got lots more here, but we'd like to hear from you as well. Anyone like to start? Yes.
Very interested in the future of 151 Mercer, the heritage building, which was, as Wes said, part of all that corner, part of mechanical vehicle maintenance and sales. So I understand 151's owned by council now, and I wonder what it's going to be used for. Publicly accessible, I hope, and used to tell some of the story of that site.
Thank you. So my understanding it's an open canvas at the moment. There's been nothing decided in terms of its use, and it's going out to public consultation. There'll be some community engagement to find out what it should be and what the community wants it to be. And then from there it'll be made into that purpose. So it really is at the moment just being restored to its original footprint, and then the community engagement will come in, and then there'll be a design proposal and engagement through that.
Leslie, do you have any thoughts on possible uses?
I mean, we did explore quite a few options when we were going through the initial design phase, and I think, as you pointed out, the idea of it being publicly accessible, it should activate the precinct, it should complement the precinct. There's got to be a dialogue and an engagement between 151 and the Civic Precinct. It shouldn't just sit in isolation alone with its back turned towards the precinct. So we had envisioned it, opening out into the public space and not just fronting Mercer Street. So design interventions like that, maybe a few terraces or rooftop gardens so it could talk to the podium levels. So there's lots of ideas. I think you can do lots with it. So it could be quite an exciting small project to do.
Thanks, Wesley. Phoebe?
I think, is that working? I think that there needs to be community consultation, which is obviously already happened, but have it accessible to the community to show that tangible history and heritage that you're harking back to with 151 in particular. That original site was not just of 151, but that original block was actually quite a bit larger, so it's been cut off. Originally was owned where 151 is now, purchased from the Crown by several different people, but Mr. Belcher, George Frederick Belcher, who we know in built heritage, which has since been demolished on the corner of Ryrie and Murrabul Street, and also the Belcher Fountain. So I think giving the community an idea about going forward, giving the community an idea about what was there, and let them have access to that and show what Geelong can do, grow Geelong as a community, and open it up to whoever, to an extent, whoever's going to use that in the best possible way.
Thanks, Phoebe. David or Peter, would you like to respond?
One of the points I like about the proposed development is the way it retains that complex, which is they're really the 1920s Balfour's and Richardson's garage as a single-storey industrial group on that main intersection, and the development's actually quite recessive at the back of it. So I think heritage-wise, it works really well from a streetscape perspective. I have been inside those buildings and they have been gutted and refurbished as offices. So perhaps there is a relatively open canvas as to what those spaces might be used for internally.
Look, my answer is pretty much the same. As Wesley have said, it is going out to public consultation, and we really should leave it at that, because I think it's exciting what may be suggested and what the future use for it could be. So, you know, those out there here in the audience and those listening, if you've got an idea what 151 should be used for, let us know.
Absolutely, and after the panel discussion, we can start that discussion this morning. And everyone watching online will get all of the materials from today's session as well and be able to provide input too. Okay, do we have any more questions from the audience? Or do I get to ask? Oh, yes, the back.
Hello. We do have a question through from the live stream. What kind of public spaces will be in the new Civic offices?
Wesley, I think that's for you.
So the public the public really occupies the ground plane of the precinct, and then as you move up through the building, it becomes a more secure zone for the council offices. But the idea is you can move through uninterrupted through the ground plane, through the foyer where you've got the customer service where you pay your rates, you can speak with council and you meet with council for planning. So there's really that engagement there, and then there's an invited space when you get up to the podium level in the meeting rooms and the foyer space and pre-function space. So the idea is that the ground floor is and the landscape is really that public amenity for the project.
Thanks, Wesley. Maybe just building on that, could you maybe talk a little bit about how the central public space, the external space, how that is intended to be activated?
It's a good question. I mean, the idea is to, again, keep it pretty open. The idea it can host a series of events and not just cater to one type of event. You know, so is it some sort of community gathering space? Would there be market stores? And the idea is that it was trying to complement other spaces in Geelong and not trying to detract from other public spaces where there are markets or where it is a larger event space. So I suppose it's supposed to be a bit more of an intimate to medium-size gathering place for the community. There's obviously lots of seating opportunities. There's the F&B that we mentioned. There's within that landscape, again, a more open space with tree canopies and open to the sky, and then you move down to the laneways and to the northwest where it's there's more vegetation, it's more intimate, less wide. So we're trying to provide a diversity of spaces within the landscape to, again, cater for different types of events.
Thanks. Any more questions from the audience or in the chat? No, not at the moment. Okay. Well, I'll take an opportunity to ask another one. What does it mean to acknowledge history and heritage in the design of our city, and especially in Geelong, and why is that important?
I think I touched on this before, but to have a tangible experience when it comes to heritage and to show visitors in particular, it has been shown that visitors are attracted to a history or heritage or something. So to have a tangible building or space that can give you a story about what happened there, what happened in the community, how that community's been built as well. I think that you don't necessarily need to keep a whole building or a whole space if that's not economical or environmentally, it impacts on the environment. But I think if you can take a part of that and showcase it in some way that you are going to tell people a story, and it gives people an understanding about themselves as well, knowing a little bit about their history or the history of where they live or the community in which they live in.
Thanks, Phoebe.
I have probably just one point. I think it's critical and fundamental to creating a sense of place for a project. Can be used as an educational tool, and it also allows you to build sustainable communities, and so there's a bit of a discussion around that. But yeah, creating a sense of place, acknowledging that it has a history, and then how it informs the future use of the space as well.
David or Peter, would you like to comment?
Look, I was going to say it's all about the vibe. And by that I mean you get a feel for a place, you get a feel for the people in the city, and the city is a reflection of those people. And heritage plays such an important role in every city, so I think people acknowledge and want to learn about the history of the city. So that's important to try and hang on to, but Geelong is in that stage where we're coming from where we've been, and the manufacturing, and to where we're going. So it's to find that right balance with some of those buildings, which is so important.
Absolutely.
And yes, I'm probably in agreement with Phoebe again that heritage is a lot about capturing stories, and in many ways, fabric becomes a vehicle for delivery of the story. But it's the prompter, it's the props almost to help tell the stories. But then we also have other spaces like Johnson Park where places can be special simply for their community attachment. And I think both Wadawurrung and Europeans realise that Johnson Park is incredibly special as a hub, a community meeting place in our city, and the fact that many of our prominent public buildings are in an arc around it. It is a very special place.
Well, I think, just to add to that, I think this building really sets a benchmark for responding to the context of Geelong, which maybe we haven't always seen come through very well in the past, both in terms of references to that industrial heritage and also the natural landscape that we have as well, the landform. Okay, I'll just check in again. Any more questions from the audience? Yeah, we got one online.
Yeah, another online question. What do you think is something happening now that will become part of Geelong's story for future generations? What's happening now that's making history in Geelong?
Fantastic question. Who would like to start? Peter.
I think you've spoken about this building, but I think as you've come in, you've seen what's happening across the road. In years to come, that will be part of history of Geelong. The period where the new library and the whole cultural precinct and the whole little Mercer Street right through to the other side of the Mel, the Green Spine, they will all be part of Geelong's history, looking forward and then looking back to see what's been achieved. It's an exciting time in Geelong.
Absolutely. Who would like to go next?
I suppose I was thinking, we've come from very much an industrial roots here in the city, and I suppose like most of the rest of the world, I think it is evolving into more a technological focus. I think the whole social demographic, the whole industry, I think everybody's appreciating that the setting here of this city on the bay is one of the most beautiful settings of a city in Australia, and it's going to become a much more attractive place to live, and hopefully new industries, new uses will come here.
I tend to agree with both Peter and David. I think that given recent events in the last 12 months, we've seen an influx of people wanting to come to our region and just showcasing how special it is. And we're really growing, and I think we're growing in the right direction. And we have, this amazing building that we're sitting in today, and all the works that are going in the Arts and Cultural Precinct that will, in years to come, be able to be used by individuals and communities, and that will help to grow Geelong as a community and as a space.
I suppose the hope is that with the Civic Precinct, that this development is seen as a source of inspiration to build a whole new generation of buildings. And I think I mentioned the mass timber industry, and there's local businesses related to that industry. So really using it as a source of inspiration to almost build a new heritage for Geelong.
Absolutely. As Peter alluded to, and David, Geelong is the only north-facing waterfront city in Australia, absolutely bursting with potential as a city. And we've seen that the statistics, there's huge demand to now come and live in this area. And I guess what's really important is that we enable that in a way that we retain what's distinctive about this city and this place. Okay, yes, a question at the front.
The influx focused here of, people coming. What happens with parking? I mean, I imagine it's going to attract a lot of people. So where do people go?
There is a car park in the basement that takes up almost the full boundary of the site for council vehicles and fleet cars and etc. I'm not sure if it's been determined whether it's public use or not, but I think that's maybe something Peter can comment on in terms of other facilities in the centre of the city.
I love your question, and there's no real answer to it, to be quite honest. I've been on council for 3 years, and I think it's our biggest headache, and it's certainly the biggest. Some councillors want free parking in the city, others don't agree with that, and that's ongoing. We will still have that debate, I think, even as close as next Tuesday night. But there's a parking strategy coming before us, I'm sure it's in the next 6 weeks. So, and that's been a lot of work done over a long period of time. So hopefully there'll be some answers in that. But the short answer to your question, there's never enough, is there? Never enough parking.
That's why it's important to position these type of developments near public transport. I mean, a couple of 100 metres away from the railway, and you can walk to the ferry. So having those amenities and having urban generation occur around public transport is very important for these reasons.
Absolutely, and just to add to that, we part of our future will be a more balanced transport system, not just a complete reliance on private motor vehicles. That's a key goal of the Clever and Creative Vision, is to have at least half of our trips undertaken by public transport, by walking and cycling, and we're actively working towards that with the state government.
I'll just mention that the council offices have end-of-trip facilities, so for people that cycle to work or run to work, and to have that amenity so even the people working in the precinct can use those facilities and have an alternative mode of transport, which is really important for new developments.
Thank you. Yes, at the back.
On from that question. Got it together. Thank you. How many people are anticipated to be accommodated in the council-owned building, and has that changed since circumstances in the last 12 months with very many more people working from home? So it lessens the congestion in the city centre. Is there a need for these high-rise offices? I know I'm not considering this one high-rise, but is there a need for the other high-rise offices to the same extent now that we have this good alternative of working from home?
It's a fair question. I believe the capacity is about 900 people. Is that correct, Lynn? With a workplace manager sitting in the audience, so I'm looking to her. I believe it's about 900 people for the council office building. Absolutely, it's a live discussion at the moment in terms of do we need to build the high rises and occupy them 24/7, I think that discussion is fairly fresh, and we'll be continuing to have it over the next couple of years. And maybe there's a happy medium. So at Cox Architects, we've implemented a flexible workspace plan, and we're 70% in the office and 70 out. So maybe it's not 100% occupancy, but maybe it's reduced. But I think, or at least from my experience of working through lockdown for 9 months in Melbourne, you do miss that interaction in the office place. I think it's really important, especially in design, that collaborative, interactive way of working. I think after a while, people will miss that and want to come back into a workplace. And then even with planning or the public's interaction with council, it's important for people to be able to come in, have an interface and meet with a person and sit down and talk through what they need to talk through.
Thanks, Wesley. Would any of the other panellists like to have a go with that? I think it's very much a live situation, I think, as Wesley has said. We're still, like every organisation, trying to work this out. And I think even when we do have a plan, it's going to take a period of time to see how that actually plays out. Okay. Any more questions from the audience? No? Okay. Get another one from me then. How can we navigate cultural differences and find common ground in creating new spaces or restoring existing ones?
This has obviously been touched on with Wesley, but there's no questions traditional owners need to be consulted in that capacity. I think community consultation also goes a really long way, seeing what the community wants to get out of any space.
Look, I think there is a lot of common ground in reality. From discussions we've had with the Waterung, very keen on open space and designs of open space. And one of the things we're really short of in the city is, in fact, open space and well-designed open spaces, I suppose. So it's likely we're going to end up with a mix of, I suppose, like Indigenous design open spaces and historic structures forming the city. But there are other many similarities. The entire concept of caring for country and what we pursue in terms of environmentally sustainable development are actually very closely aligned. So the need to be more environmentally efficient, more environmentally sensitive. And I think it's only through mutual respect of everyone's cultures that we're actually going to be able to advance the city and develop ourselves.
Wesley, would you like to have a go?
I suppose from a design perspective, it's important that we design places that are all inclusive. And I know with the Civic Precinct, it's had such an extensive community engagement, which I think is quite unique, and I think Geelong can be really proud of. So even before we started the project, there was community engagement. During the conceptual development and schematic design, there was community engagement, and we would meet once a month with the Aboriginal engagement and for the artworks, and it's been extensive. It's been a great experience for me personally, but also for the project team, and I think it's something we really want to continue through other projects as well.
I think just to add to that, I mean, this is a very, very complex subject, and we've touched on the Aboriginal component to it, but of course we've got many different ethnic groups in our community with different ways of using public spaces, different ways of inhabiting those spaces, and and of course creating an inclusive space, as Wesley has touched on, is such a broad subject. We're really trying to cater to different ages, gender, sexual orientation, different ethnic groups, physical and mental abilities. And I think if we're being honest, we have a lot to learn about how to actually do that. So I think sort of starting with some humility on that journey is a really important part of the solution. Okay. Any more questions from the audience? I think we've still got time for at least one more. Or do I get the final one? Okay, I get the final one, I think. And this is a great one. Heritage is a very contested area. So the question is there ever a downside to preserving heritage?
I don't think there's a downside. I'll state my opinion. I think it can be tricky and difficult when you're trying to design for 21st century, whether it be workplace environments, cultural environments, public environments. It can essentially be prohibitive because it's been designed for a different area, for different technologies, for different cultures in a way, you know. It can be tricky, but I think we need to work with it. I don't think we should just kind of give up and push it to one side and demolish down. I think it's important that we do acknowledge the importance of the history and heritage and try and integrate it. And hopefully today in the presentation we're able to communicate ways of doing that, whether it's through materiality, spatial configuration, through art, through planting and landscape design.
I tend to agree with Wesley. I do think that there are a few downsides to trying to hold on to some parts of heritage that are just beyond repair, and I mean physically beyond repair, that are going to cost both physically, financially and environmentally to keep a building, let's say building, for the sake of the fact that it is old, that it is part of the heritage. I think if you can keep, if it's not viable to keep a complete building, can we keep part of it? Can we keep part of it and then still showcase it to the region or the community in a way that still tells you a story about what was here, what happened on this particular site or in this particular area, if it's not viable to, it's not sustainable environmentally and financially to a community.
Thank you, Phoebe. David?
Yeah, I think the downside is a lack of understanding of what is heritage and what's important about it. And I suppose first and foremost is that we need to, I suppose, you know, have discussions with the community about that. And we need to come to an understanding of what the values of places actually are, because there are places that have higher levels of value and you want to be more conservative and more restrictive about what can happen to them. But then there are places with lesser value and you should have greater flexibility with those also. Yeah, sorry, I had another thought, lost it now.
Peter, would you like to share your thoughts?
Last word. Well, not the final word, but look, I think as a councillor, there's no easy answer to something like this, and but I think Phoebe has said it is the cost. You know, when we get reports, there's always a cost factor, and I think Osborne House is a great example of that. We've committed $10 million to that over the next 3 to 4 years for the restoration of Osborne House. It had sat idle there for so long. We're calling for expressions of interest for the use of it, but certainly the cost factor does come into some of these decisions. But yeah, it's not easy. It's a tricky situation. Yeah.
Slightly loaded question.
Yeah, I figured out what I want. I suppose when we talk about heritage, the focus has always been to look back at the past. But in terms of heritage management, the focus needs to be to look to the future. And I think that's where we've got to shift all our mindsets. It's about what are we taking we value from the past into the future. But to do that, it's actually about having a vision for how the character of the city should be conserved or should be allowed to change, and then individual places within the city. You know, how are they going to serve our community in 20 or 30 years? Why are they going to be valued then? What is the best way we can move forward in their management?
Thank you. We've time for one final question, quick one. If anyone in the audience or anything online? Nothing online. Okay, well, I've got one to wrap up for today for the panel. So what would you like to see in the Civic Precinct in 20 years' time?
I'd like to see it being used for its design purpose, I suppose, hosting civic events and being a catalyst for urban regeneration, and the surrounding sites are revitalised both in streetscape and built form, and it's used as a catalyst. Yeah.
I think public spaces, green spaces, places where people can come together and feel safe and comfortable, and to be able to show off what Geelong has to offer.
I'd like Geelong to retain its identity, and I think we've been having discussions, and I think the last thing all of us probably want is it to become a mini Melbourne. There's a wonderful industrial character here, and even the retail area. It has these wonderful Victorian streetscapes, which aren't present in some of the larger cities of Australia. And it's not that we should freeze them all in time, but they should be retained as definitely a stronger element as we go forward.
Thanks, David. Last word to Peter.
Thank you. In 20 years' time, I'm hoping the people of Geelong will be proud of what has been achieved with the civic accommodation. Certainly a lot of us would have moved on, I think, but and to be able to look back and see the decisions made over the last couple of years and right now holds the city in good stead, and I'll get back to the word, we're proud of what has been achieved.
Absolutely. Hear, hear. Okay, well that concludes our panel discussion for today. Please join me in thanking our panel, Wesley, Phoebe, David and Peter.